Hello and good morning or afternoon or evening, wherever you are and whenever you're watching this. Welcome to this discussion on holistic midlife transitions, beyond strategies to wisdom. Today, we're going to be addressing a few topics, and we're going to do this very conversationally. And what we're hoping to get covered in the next half hour or so is looking at traditional problem solving techniques in midlife transitions and why maybe that's not the path you want to take, and looking at more strategies or more systems is another perhaps way that you don't want to look at dealing with your midlife transitions. We want to help you to consider embodied wisdom and how accessing that wisdom might be the best route for you in your midlife transitions. I want to introduce to you Amber Pena Posey, who is a psychologist and a creative, very creative, and we're just having a conversation today about these topics. So I'll hand it over to you, Amber, and you can tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll get into the meat of our discussion.
Yeah. Well, I'm not a psychologist. I'm a psychotherapist
Psychotherapist,
in
thank
my
you.
training, and I always just like to make sure people know that. And I'm a psychiatric and family nurse practitioner by training. And like you, I had a stronger midlife transformation versus, and I always say transformation rather than transition because it didn't feel like a pivot and it didn't feel like a transition. It felt like, woo, this is kind of, a threshold that I wasn't necessarily expecting because I really did feel like I lived a life of purpose, fulfillment, creativity, enjoyment, helped people, and really still had to learn to surrender a little bit more into the larger wisdom of life versus that achievement and accomplishment model that we're all kind of swimming in our society. And it's tough. It's a tough space to be because it brings up securities, your scarcity, your trust in self, trust in others, big kind of faith, uh, your concepts of spirituality, soul, physical health, all the things, right? So it isn't for sissies, as they say, aging isn't for sissies. And so it's just been really beautiful on that other side and learning how, even with my background, how to work with my own experience and not kind of place myself in a box. If I have to get here now, I should know better. A lot of those things that can happen when we do have certain wisdom and certain awareness, certain knowledge, I think sometimes that can be even harder for us. So yeah.
Yeah, and to step outside of the paradigms of what this whole thing is supposed to look like is super challenging, right?
Yeah.
Because you're sort of bumping up against the grain. And then from a male point of view, like I largely work with male clients going through their midlife transition. A lot of times it's sort of career is the sort of hook
Mm-hmm.
that I use to get in there. And then
Yeah.
we see there's so many other things going on, right? But when you realize, oh, I don't need to follow a certain script, and midlife doesn't necessarily need to mean, oh, this is the beginning of the end, i.e., I'm heading to retirement, blah, 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 blah.
Yes.
To me, it's exactly the opposite. It's like, no, this is a springboard to something incredibly beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah. And my own experience was, where are the tools and the resources to guide me? And somehow I stumbled upon coaching. I was oblivious to the whole coaching world. And that kind of opened it up for me as an individual that realized I still needed to do a lot of expanded kind of understanding of self. And then having the joy and the privilege to be able to share some of that wisdom with others.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, that, like you said, there are like earlier about like, we're not a big fan, you and I both aren't huge fans of strategies and step-by-step tools because generally it is asking for something different in different times in our lives. And again, transitions, there are transitions in life. There's definitely guaranteed stages of life that happen. But what I've noticed is there is midlife, particularly, is like you go onto another shore. So it's like you leave this one land, and so you're in that watery depths, and that feels very different than some of the transitions earlier in your life, right? So like more of a standard. And when I say, again, this is not new to our generations, it's just that not as much people talked about it in other than like a retirement model, or again, unless you were doing some inner work and you had mentors. And so I think you and I both believe in this idea of taking away some of the stigma, I guess, of that, especially if I think you and I both have worked with high achievers, where you kind of have this very linear path that has been very successful. And so you feel like such a beginner. And it's different than like jumping from a strength to strength, even though there is a strength to strength that's happening. Like you are doing, like you're going to use your strengths. I often talk about it. It's your genius that's kind of coming in. And that feels like it's like a shyness that you don't typically understand and you don't usually see being talked about because it's kind of messy, right? And no one likes to usually present themselves as a mess.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and it's interesting that the messy. So two things: the water element, love that, and the beginner's mind. But the messiness of it all, and yeah, in our ego, at kind of high achieving kind of way, we don't want to be perceived as being a mess. And so that
No.
front that we, and when we have that front of I'm so together and all of that creates this, this cognitive dissonance. So we're in turmoil inside.
Yeah.
And then so the water thing, I just want to tap into that. So the fluidity, like being able to navigate from maybe less solid ground, like the earth element, into like this more fluid kind of spacious, well, that's air, but this idea of the water, it's just always like fluid and malleable, and it moves, right? And I think in midlife, if we get too confined and caged to what this should look like, by what society tells us, then that's not going to be helpful. And the idea of the beginner's mind, which is so hard for us, especially when we've had success, to kind of go back to, oh, I'm being a beginner. And my example of that recently is I started doing Tai Chi classes. Oh my gosh. Like it's so contrary to what I know from being a yoga person for 30 years. Though, like, let your shoulders relax. I'm like, no, so I have to like really, really consciously allow myself to be in that beginner's mind. And I think that's important for midlifers.
Big time, right? And it's the sense of, if you were satisfied in staying where you were, you don't actually have that call. Like that call doesn't kick in because of satisfaction. It kicks in because of dissatisfaction, and almost like you've stretched that limit of that role. So again, I call soul call versus a roll call. And it's not that there's anything wrong with the prior roles that you've chosen. Just like, I mean, you as a human, to function, you're going to put on some clothing to say I am, like, so we can just use me, like I'm a therapist, right? I loved that role. It's not that I had a problem with that role. It allowed me to kind of navigate the world, and one word that, what do you do? I'm a therapist, right? And I think what happens when you're in those stages of midlife transition, especially if you don't, I think soul-driven people in general don't necessarily view like retirement as some like panacea. They're like, well, I actually want to like use myself in this world until I'm dead. And so it is like a little bit of feeling like you're outside of the bell curve, because there are so many people who are like, well, I'm going to do all these things and accumulate, and then I'm going to retire. And so generally soul driven people, I would say, meaning in touch with soul driven, because I think everyone actually has the capacity to be soul driven. But when you're in touch with that soul driven part of you, you were like, that would be very dissatisfying. This current role, if I stay longer, is actually like, you can do it in your sleep, but not in a way that feels satisfying anymore, right? Because, I think your gifts generally, you can kind of like, there's an ease to them, but it doesn't feel as satisfying. And then, like the kind of the story arc is like, you'll just switch to like this, like, mentor that is grounded, but there is that messy middle before you feel that groundedness, I would say, right? And that is that eldership, that wise woman, that wise man that we don't actually have demonstrated because of societal kind of constructs of like, well, what's in your bank account, as
Mhm.
if that is the ultimate sense of being, versus like you need a certain level to take care of yourself, and then like what do you want to do with the rest of your life?
Yeah, and it's the bank account for sure. It's the status, it's the titles, it's all of those things, that those accolades we achieve from external, right? And this thing that you were saying about we can all tap into the soul. Clearly, I agree with that. The thing I think that happens is like the way I characterize this is there's this kind of tap on your shoulder, like,
Mm-hmm.
dude,
Yeah,
there's more to this than you're kind of, even in your success, even in all of
yeah,
the stuff and the surroundings and all of that. And I think what often happens is there's this recognition that there's potentially more, but it's like, I'll get there when. So it's kind of
mm-hmm.
almost like this delayed
Delay.
gratification thing that we get taught in this society as well. Like retire and then you can like kick back and whatever. It's like, well, what about the day to day? Like, why not tap into those energies outside of the linear, rational, left brain kind of stuff every friggin' day? And
Yeah,
then your success is going to look and feel so much different. That's
yeah,
the embodiment kind of stuff that we're talking about.
yeah. And I think it is because we all are so good at linearity, right? It serves its purpose, that it is trusting in that more creative spiral dance that, again, some people, even in their first career or first kind of role, are good at that. But it's a more embodied space of it, and a sense of safety and security, of course, is, Maslow's hierarchy. We need those things. But that sense of when is enough enough, and again, not being so tied into the larger structures of society that are never satisfied, right? There's an insatiability about what is enough and growth at all costs. And I don't mean growth as like a personal growth. I mean like scaling businesses and increasing bank accounts and increasing experiences, rather than deepening into reverence and sacredness of the here and now, that allows you to tap into true vision versus mind oriented goals, right? and
Yeah.
and again, time and a place. It's not like you can't ever have a goal and you can't ever use linear thinking, but it's like you've already experienced that world. And again, you don't have dissatisfaction if you don't have dissatisfaction. So you have a dissatisfaction, and so if you try to approach the dissatisfaction from the older way of being, even if there were a lot of things that were great about it, um, it's saying, can you learn to trust it? Meaning, yeah, tapping on your shoulder. Can you trust something bigger than your kind of capacity to be like a boss, right? Like, so again,
Mhm.
high achievers are like, I get things done. It's enjoyable. It's successful. Again, nothing wrong with that. But it's like the depth of it is still like you're just touching the surface. So yeah, that water element is like going into the watery deep, and knowing that if we think about it, the ocean, right? I mean, there it's deep and there is always a bottom. So it's like trusting that you hit this grounding and there is that stability, but that kind of tumbling around, right, is disorienting, disillusioning, right? And so that orientation is because you're moving to a new way to orient, a new way of being illuminated, and the elements are helpful to think about, I would say, because it helps you think about where am I if I'm too earthbound. Actually, a lot of people are not as earthbound. They tend to be too airy, right? And
Very,
so
yeah.
like get into the earth, into your body first, because that is the vessel
Yeah.
to
Well,
experience it. Go ahead.
and I think that's the process, right? Like it's like,
Yeah.
yeah, a lot of us are so heady, like we're in our
Mhm.
heady, and that heady energy is very spacious, but not in a constructive, helpful, spacious way. It's in a
Yes.
confusing kind of
Mhm.
spaciousness, right? Like scattered, let's say
Yes.
scattered instead of spacious, scattered, right? And then if you anchor through the earth, and that can be many things. It can be, like this forest bathing, that's the new kind of
Mhm.
term. It's like go walk in the wilderness, go walk in nature, right? That is healing and soothing and grounding. So
Yes.
this is, again, simple steps to embodiment, right? Like
Mhm.
I was reading something the other day where the fellow was saying he was working with someone who was just, hyperachiever, blah, 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 blah. And really hard on herself, and not being able to sort of give herself that sort of deserving, I'm worthy of,
Yeah.
kind of, even though she was like top grade, you know. And his recommendation was 1 day a week, take 30 minutes out of your day earlier, like cut it out 30 minutes earlier, and just go and do something kind for yourself, like go for a walk. So I think these kinds of things are where we need to meet people, you know, so that's not like, you need, like, to your point, there's good in what we've achieved, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, it got us to a certain point, but when there's this angst or malaise or whatever you want to call it, that's kind of in there, kind of going, there are little incremental steps we can take to find that new version of ourselves, that
Yeah.
more holistic version of ourselves, that more integrated whole.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sitting outside, and to me, nature is always the first step. It's a great reminder too of what you can count on, because I think what happens is you feel like, oh, there's nothing that I can count on because I'm in this space. And so it's like, okay, sun rises, sun sets, trees, leaves fall. There's moon cycles. It really starts, and then it's like, oh, I'm nature. It's not, I don't have to go outside. I'm nature, right? And so feeling your heartbeat. Now, of course, that can be a anxiety response for people who are like, oh, my heart's racing, right? Or breathing in. And so you're like, okay, let's just breathe out, right? Things that are like reminding you, like, body connected to the earth, body, earth, right? Body, earth.
Yeah.
And then one thing I like to talk, I mean, I have this thing called the Creative RX, right? This idea of creativity is very different than end result art. And so a lot of high achievers also lean towards perfectionism, right? And
Yes.
so they're very good at what they do, and anything that they're not going to be good at, God forbid we try. So creativity is a really fun thing, because it's saying, like, the creative process, which to me is very much like a therapeutic process, the creative process is, all of this is allowed. You can't mess it up. It's not an end result right now. It doesn't mean you can't eventually use creativity to say, I want to do something that has an end result, an outcome. But it's saying, for now, can you play creativity, some child parts of you to come online that don't do things for outcome. And if you do everything from outcome, it's a sure way to be dissatisfied with life, right? Because I mean, look at what that, like, if we're in our current world space, right, globally, it's not a great outcome. So you can just hit your head against the wall instead of being like, what can I do for nurturing myself, right? Nurture is the capacity to do everything. It's that receiving energy, nurturing energy, so that you can actually, if you're going to accomplish something again, which you can totally have hope and vision towards, you're not going to be able to do it without nurturing yourself. Because again, even if you did it before without as much nurturing, you literally hit walls. Like, I would say for me, I was like, oh, I'll keep on, like, I like to talk about this because I was continuing to try to see if I could kind of veer, pivot, transition, instead of like, settle down. This is a transformative experience. You're not going to get your way the way you once did, because you're like, that lesson has been learned. Like, you have willpower, you have the capacity to do some things, but like, what do you really want?
Yeah. And I know you and I are both, students of the positive intelligence approach. And the beautiful thing about that approach is these simple tools, right?
Yeah.
Feel your feet on the floor right now, to the earlier point about grounding, and just pay attention to that,
Yeah.
for a few breaths, watch your body breathing for a few breaths, like all of that. Well, not only does it shift what's going on up here, it also is calming and soothing to the nervous system.
Yeah.
And then all that scattered energy that can just be so overwhelming, and it's like, where do I go now? Even if we are in that hyperachiever kind of mode, a lot of that energy does need to be grounded, right?
Yeah.
The other thing that I've found as a hyperachiever is, not, and it's really only in the last couple of years that this has become so clear to me, that when I give myself spaciousness, and again, this is like the more positive aspect of the air element, like spaciousness, just to be, to be in the moment, whether I'm in the middle of something or I'm just taking a little bit of downtime, that is so incredibly powerful. And as a hyperachiever, what I tend to do is push more and more and more, because that's what I need to do to be successful. So I've got this sort of notion of what success is for me is to always be doing something, always have that project, always be go, go, go. And never taking that time just to kind of go like, oh, okay, here I am. That was actually really good what I just accomplished. Never taking time for that.
Yeah, celebration, forget that.
So, yeah, like no, never. No, you don't celebrate because you've got the next thing to work on.
Yeah.
And then it just becomes maniacal. And then that
Mhm.
can significantly impact our health, our overall
Yeah.
mental well-being, you know. So
Well, and hyperachievers burn out for a reason, right? Because
yes,
it's an unsustainable approach. And even, you even said like as a hyperachiever, which is like part of it is saying like a history of being able to use achievement and uh, awareness of nothing wrong with achievement, but hyper achievement, right, is like a proving value versus
yes,
like just enjoying accomplishment and achievement, which is a natural human behavior. Like it is normal to achieve things. It's just that the hyper component, or like you said, the maniacal, right? That mania of achievement as who I am, and forgetting that that is a mechanical approach and a machine-like approach that has never been meant for humans. Like humans are not meant to just be task-oriented, right? It doesn't mean we can't be task-oriented, but we are meant to really enjoy the time and space that we put our attention to versus next, next, next. And I think that that's the other thing too, is achievement is like an indoctrination of, if I am achieved or if I'm busy, I belong to a
yes.
group of people that if they don't also take the time, and this is us learning how to have connections with people so that we actually understand like what do people actually value versus thinking like we all value achievement. Because our society values achievement, but it's like what do individuals value, right? And so it's that who do I belong to? I have to belong to myself in order to belong to others, and then people who understand connection and relationships know that none of us are meant to be active all of the time, right? And that busyness is a disease versus healthy levels of organic productivity and organic performance because I value something, not because I'm told I should do it,
Yeah.
right?
That's so interesting. And then what I find too with men in particular, and you could speak to the women's side because you've had more experience there than I, but a lot of this, you know, achievement kind of rising to the top, then the people that are around you are sort of slowly dissipating. The ones that you can be in a, you know, vulnerable, trusting relationship with, and sometimes that's not even your partner, your
Mm-hmm.
most intimate relation. And so that can be very isolating too
Yeah.
at times. And this is where, you know, you have this double whammy of this midlife transition thing where you feel so isolated, you're confused, and yet you're this, you know, upper echelon of society. It's this paradox. That's really unwieldy. And again, tapping into that embodied wisdom, that deeper sense of knowing and trusting that, so
Yeah.
important.
And that trusting journey also is like letting ourselves, because like one of the things I love to think about for me and for clients that I've talked to is like, I certainly did not ever think I had a problem trusting myself. Like not at all. Like I was like, yeah, I trust myself. And so the exposure of, well, what parts do you trust yourself? Because I'm not saying there wasn't any, but
Yeah.
there was the part that isn't tied to my career or tied to my relationships, my meaningful relationships. Just like so, the Amber that is um, not in a role, like that part is like, oh, do I really trust her, right? And it brings up, I think, faith and trust, which if we have any kind of traumas tied to religion, authority, things like that, that stuff is very hard to kind of work through on your own typically too. So like you get a reassessment of like, oh, when did this value system kind of happen, right? And so if
Mhm.
there has been a sense of like, I can only trust me, that's who I can trust, which can, you may not look like you've had trauma, that when that starts happening to you in midlife and you have all these resources to take care of yourself, but you feel somewhat helpless, like that, there is that threshold into like, wow, this is bigger than what I thought it was, right? Which is why it is a spiritual journey more so than this is why career counseling, for people who've thought they've had purpose, it's like when people say, well, you need purpose, right? That's like a classic career counseling concept for younger people. When people who've had purpose feel this existential angst, it is very like, I've had purpose. Like, so I understand, and so there's all these kind of, again, confusing feelings and confusing thoughts. And so why you do have to go into your embodied self, because if you don't, you're going to fall for strategies that aren't actually addressing, they're not the medicine for what is needed.
And like purpose is interesting to me because I think in life, purpose shifts and changes necessarily, right? Mm-hmm. And so in midlife, if we're tapping into this sort of something bigger, then that purpose is more, we'll call it soul aligned, as opposed to the purpose of achievement, of hitting those goals and all those metrics of success, right? That we're all so familiar with and that we beat ourselves up over.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I would say for me, I went into my career not for necessarily success. I really enjoyed it and I naturally was successful. And so that's the interesting part, is when you start seeing that you went in from, like, say, a more noble purpose, you get successful naturally because that's generally that works. And then you start over aligning with the success metrics versus the cause. That's the part that can be, I think, really, I'd like to work with helpers because typically helpers do lean towards, I did have a purpose-oriented career that wasn't about money and success. I naturally became successful. And then where did these values start getting in where I misconstrued? And then part of it is also helping professionals lean, and this is even once you do your second career or third career, whatever, we do lean towards over giving as a definition of who we are versus that reciprocity that's natural, because we generally don't enjoy feeling helpless, right? We don't like that feeling. And if you can't allow for natural dependence and helplessness as just a part of your journey, you spend your whole life fighting it. And so you're naturally, that's the wounded healer. You're naturally overly giving instead of like, it's okay that you too have powerlessness and helplessness for a stage of your life,
And what I love about that, and it sort of echoes back to what I was saying earlier, when I discovered coaching there, I realized, oh my gosh, there's more layers to this onion, that I'd been spiritually bypassing a lot of it for 2 decades, right? But going into that and just being able to, like, when people would ask me questions in the past, I would literally my body would respond like, Lauren, blah, blah, blah. And I'd just be like, I don't know, like when people queried me about whatever, like even coming out of a movie, did you like the movie? I'd just be like, don't ask me a question. And then so when you get into coaching and it's like, it's all questions and you're sort of, you have to like, because I was avoiding so much, right? So much. And so this, I think too, is part of the journey. We can be super, super successful, but still have all this shadowy crap inside of us, even through therapy and stuff that is still kind of, or in the positive intelligence world, we look at the notion of how these saboteurs are just messing with us and keeping us in sort of fear-based, anxious mode for way more time than we need to be. But yeah, so that inner inquiry is part of the journey, and I think it's part of life. And for me, the satisfaction in my sort of continued awakening over the last couple of years is I know that that's going to be an ongoing part of this. This life.
And that's that ongoing part is that part that I think trips up most high achievers, because there is, just from going to school, you have linear ways of what this is. And so moving from that linear approach of success to an embodied sense of inner success that is more unknown versus known, more enjoying the question versus the answer, more reflective, more contemplative, allowing for the time and space for those bigger questions to meet you versus that demand energy that comes from like a career when you said that reactive energy of when people are asking you questions, because a part of it is, I think, we all almost expect everybody to have clear, concise answers about everything, as
Yes.
if like confusion is a bad thing, or
And
admitting,
not having an answer is
yeah,
okay.
admitting that there's some unknown. And again, especially if you lean towards an expertise model.
Yeah.
I remember as a therapist, I had a young therapist. She was getting her bachelor's, so she was going to become a therapist, and she was my client. And she was like learning a lot of things, and she's like, "Oh my God, she was like brought up a theory," and I was like, "I don't know." Like I was like, "That was like 20 years ago. I don't remember the exact right." And she's like, "Oh, that was really nice that you said that." I was like, "Yeah, I'm not teaching theory. Like I remember it, but I don't function from like I'm not here to use psychiatric terms or psychological terms in the room. I'm here to know you as a human."
Mm.
And that's that part, that intuitive trust, that I will say, if you've had a first career that was intuitively based, it's helpful. But even that is still having to let go that time and space of like, oh, my intuition, am I feeling it? Am I allowing it to come? Because I'm in like a panic to get to the next stage, right? And that's the part that I was like, oh, I felt like I was losing some of my intuitive connection because of like allowing the panic that set in, tied to like, oh, I can't be in this in between space, right? Instead of being like,
Yeah.
I am. That's the truth. I'm in an in between.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's powerful. I think one other thing that just came to mind when you were saying that was how we can get into the mode of, sort of like the personal development stuff. We're reading lots of books or listening to the smarty people on YouTube and all of that stuff. And then just wondering, like, why am I not getting this? Like, why is it not, because that whole embodiment stuff, if it's stuck up here in the
Yeah.
intellect, it's like it needs to drop,
Mm-hmm.
here. It needs to be like heart centered and all that. And for men in particular, I find working with them, they'll be like, I'm thinking this, and I think, and I'll just say, stop. What do you feel?
Yeah,
What
exactly.
do you feel? And they're like, what? And I went through that. In
Yeah,
my
we are.
20s. The first time I went to therapy, it's like, what are you feeling? I had no clue. But even just to get them, put your hand on your heart and just kind of say, can you drop that energy that's all up here right now in there? And sometimes they get it, sometimes they don't. But over time, they certainly get it. And
Yeah.
I think that's part two of the not part two, the number, but part TOO of the embodiment, right? Is less of that heady kind of just like drop in, feel, and
Yeah.
even the gut, like
Well, and even too, like sometimes people who are very mind oriented, when you say like, what's the sensation you're feeling, they say like, it's like pressure. And so that's, at least that's the first step. Like,
yeah,
yes,
yeah,
exactly. And then can you not make it good or bad, right? Not a judgment. And then how that can typically soften. And then like, where's the other
mm,
energy? I know for me, I think body work is a huge part of our growth. And I do think, though, like I have a license to touch, but I've always been drawn to asking people to be into their body versus touching their body. But one of the things that I would say is, when you work with someone who's really fluid with touch of body, if you don't know how to even talk about a sensation yourself, sometimes people, and you can ask the client, like, put your hand here, right? Like that can be helpful. But some people, even that is really tough, right? They're like it's like still intellectual. So sometimes when you have, if somebody says like is touching you, and you can even ask your client if you're in person, right? And you say like, if I touch you right here, is that okay, right? The sense of like, can you breathe in there? Just
yeah,
breathe there, right? It just pulls you out of something.
yes,
And so that beginner of being like, especially if you've had heady knowledge and you've gotten paid for heady knowledge, right? And then you move into like, oh my God, I feel like I don't even know, like like, what do you mean touch that? Can I breathe in there? Like that part is just so beautiful in
yeah,
a way that's like, can you imagine breathing into that spot too, right? And because sometimes people with vision, when you ask them to do like an imaginative thing, even that can be hard. So that's why, again, like using anything to help yourself get in, so it doesn't even have to be like an imaginative, I should say, all of those things, and playing with whatever works for you. There's always something that lets you get into your body. But also, a lot of times, expansive energy feels scary, right?
Yes.
So
Yes.
it's
Oh
like
my
a
God.
shaky energy, like,
Yeah.
and your body in some ways is kind of like preparing to expand, and that can feel really bad depending on what that has felt like in the
Totally.
past.
Totally. Because especially in that hyperachiever kind of energy, we can feel like we're living in a cage. And
Yes,
that just becomes normalized.
yes,
Like your chest feels like it's a cage.
yes,
And then when you start to do breathing exercise and you realize, oh, I can actually open that up. You can be like super athletic and doing all of that stuff and still not know how to breathe deeply,
well, of
right?
course, yeah.
So the breath is so helpful for that expansiveness. But yes, that can feel so
It's
scary.
so scary.
Yeah.
And if you think about it, high achievers love exercise. They don't love joyful movement.
Push, push, push. Yeah.
You know what I mean? So again, it's like, well, what's the point of exercise? What's the point, right? So one of the things like I like to do is like an intuitive painting experience where you get them in their body. You can do like closing your eyes, playing with paint. Paint I like because it's sensual versus say just a pen. And you can do whatever you want. But it really is like if you close your eyes and you trust that like I'm allowed to get messy, like if it goes outside of the boundary, right? And then you look when you open your eyes and you look into like where are you most drawn? There's like a visual, like, oh, it's right there. It could be like a splotch, it could be thicker paint. That right there is like a body exercise that is fun and not scary. So one of the things that I feel like I worked with eating disorders for a really long time. So my approach is generally humans tend to restrict, most humans, especially puritanical westernized people. Restriction is the name of the game, even if you don't think you're restrictive. And the fear is if I don't discipline myself, like what's going to happen? Like totally uncaged craziness is the fear, right? And it's like I'm pretty sure your personality type, if it just gets a little engaged, is not going to be selfish and like destroy the world. It's your selfishness is actually that part of you that's continuing to be restricted. So like letting people kind of lose control with things like paint, where like you can't mess it up. You don't have to have a piece of art. It's not food, because food obviously brings up a lot of things. That can just be really fun, and it taps into that sensuality that has to be part of the midlife experience, where you start feeling like I'm caged in my sensual experience. Like my five senses and more are not being actually activated. I'm just here.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
And
We could have a whole other discussion about the senses and what that looks like and how important they are. We talked a little bit about the elements here. So let's just maybe take a little bit of time to reflect and how we can sort of summarize what we've talked about here and maybe move forward to a wrap up.
yes.
Again, this idea of traditional problem solving is probably not going to be the best solution when you're experiencing midlife transitions, right? That more strategies are just going to be more of the same.
Yes.
And that this idea of embodiment and how we can do and explore that is.
Can I say one thing about that? What I always want to remind people is strategies will come. They come again. And part of it is they have to be your strategy.
Yes.
So the embodiment helps you be like, okay, this is my next strategy. So it's not that people like you and I who really want to help people get into their bodies in embodiment first don't agree with any idea of a strategy. And it's not like we won't be practical. But there's this part that's like you've already done the to-do list and it becomes one more check-off thing instead of like the spaciousness that you usually want in midlife. You've worked hard to like get to the top to create this like big view, right? Like I feel free, and you feel lonely, and you feel like you have space and time, but you don't. So it's like, it's almost like a delay, just like you delayed gratification for some parts of you to get to an achievement. It's like, can you delay that the strategy? It's going to come, but right now we're practicing a different muscle than you've used.
Yeah. And to the point of, we don't want whatever you're doing in terms of the transition work, to be the to-do list. It's exactly the opposite for sure.
Yeah. It's that really opening into the spaciousness in your body, not just in your mind. Right. And again, your mind has done beautiful things for you to imagine ways that you can do things and create things, and it's great. It's more of like, can you also get it with your body so that you feel that channel between your heart, your mind, your gut, and connects to the earth, goes up into the imaginal realms, heaven, whatever. And the spiritual journey to me is just touching your life force. It's your vitality, creativity, connection is the spiritual journey. And we all have moments of it, but it's like you get to have it a little bit more frequently versus just like when I'm on vacation and I see the Grand Canyon, like that awe and wonder in your daily life is really important to tap in, I would say, and to feel your primal life force.
Yeah, 100%. And that vital essence is, I think, the thing that we've not done so well in this society. I think you used a term earlier that indicated, how structured and sort of rigid, those weren't your words, we are. But when we can drop into that sort of more vital essence of who and what we are, then that's kind of like the fullness. And the other thing I would say, just in terms of a wrapping up thought too, is we're not in any way saying throw out everything that you've done and achieved and all of that stuff. All of that is so necessary and purposeful for what you're going to do next, but it's not going to look the same. Like that's the thing. And you want to give yourself that spaciousness to allow, what is that next iteration of me going to look like? And it's not about throwing the baby out with the bathwater, that whole term, and buying the super fancy sports car. Not that you can't buy a super fancy sports car, but it's not about to solve a problem that is deeper.
And like you said too, that part that's sometimes even like when I think about doing guide work versus being a psychotherapist, to me they look somewhat the same. It's just more of the over reliance on the psychotherapy model, or like people are going to meet me because they have a in psychotherapy often they're like, I have a problem and I need it solved and I need it cured, right? And my favorite part was moving from stability to thriving. It wasn't necessarily crisis to stability. That's, I can do it. That's just not my favorite part. So it's like, I'm still doing some things the same, but my overall approach is even more embodied, right? And even more of, I'm not here to, I've deconstructed some of the learning that I needed to learn so that I could learn it in a more full way again, versus just the good girl that's like, I can do that. I'm going to get A's. I'm going to do this. Like, now I'm going to have my practice. Like, like the good girl part had to be able to say, like, thank you. And you're more than the good girl. You're more than the achiever, and you're more than the healer. You're all of you.
I love that. The sort of relearning the learning. And, I think one of the most important takeaways, I think, of this conversation, and this is hard for high achievers, is the beginner's mind.
Oh, it's so hard.
Just being able to step into this stage from that place of inquiry, curiosity. Who can I become? How can I tap in a deeper, more beautiful way? And that journey can be a little bit insular at times, but that's okay, right? Because when you go in there and you connect, you realize you're connected to something way bigger.
Yeah.
So there is a connection anyway.
And then your newer relationships, as well as the ones you've had in the past, feel deeper. So like, you and I met solely because I asked a question on like the positive intelligence community. I was like, hey, what about you were kind enough to reach out. I like saw that you worked with Midlife. And then I was like, oh, cool. You want to talk? Because I love midlife journeys. And then we get to do this, right? So it was like, and you and I had a great conversation like for an hour before we did this a couple weeks ago. So it was like, I wouldn't know Lauren Crawford if I stayed in that, that same space. So there's that sense of what your newer connections and your newer relational approaches feel more fulfilling, I would say, because you have let go of like the proving and the performance.
Yes.
That tends to be part of that initial crowd of like, what do you do? Give me your title. And like you and I were talking about like pretty like, and then this happened like pretty quickly without like, because the shame part and the part that's lonely, we both metabolize, right? So that's the other thing, is there is a grief, and grief tends to scare most people. And you can't do it alone. I mean, you can do anything alone, but the fuller experience is generally being witnessed in your vulnerability and your intimacy so that you can have those same relationships moving forward shame-free. And that's a very freeing space.
Beautiful. So we need to wrap up, my friend. So a couple of things. I'd like you to share, how folks can find you. And also maybe we'll talk just a little bit about this notion of a summit that we've been sort of bantering about. So what would you like to share? Is there a site or where? How would you?
So I think I gave it to you. So I don't know if you do links on this or not, but my website is thefocuspath.com, and I generally like people to shoot me emails. I have I can be online, but it's generally just once I put it on and then I'm done. So I like emails so that I can set up talking to people and connection. I like connection. I feel like I've created a life of time and space. Not everybody will become a client. Not everybody will become a colleague. But if you're interested to get to know me, that's how I like to work. And when you sign up, if you shoot me an email, you can also there's also, I think, a link for the Creative RX antidote, which is just really helping people to envision how life they want to feel versus a design from a strategic model, so they can get that freebie and that can help them too.
So you're a fast talker. For some reason, the captions are frozen, so I can't actually pull that up. So say really slowly where they're going to reach you. So
the THE focus, focus with an ED, focused path, PATH journey.com. So it's thefocuspath.com, and they can reach out to Amber. That's the easiest. And then there is a link that we could put in the for the LinkedIn at the end, that just is, they can sign up for Creative RX antidote. It's a PDF that they can get.
Great. It just let me add it. Anyway, I'm not going to get confused by all of that stuff. Great. So, and then for me, if you, laurencrawford.com is my site, and there's other connections there that can be made. And I'm just in the middle of morphing all of that stuff too, because it's an ongoing iteration and evolution of what I do and how I show up for men in midlife. So one of the other things that we're talking about for people who see this in the future and those watching now is a midlife summit where we'll bring together folks who are exploring this from a practitioner point of view, and so we can help folks explore their journeys. And so that's something I'm excited about, and I think this would be probably in the new year at some point, late spring kind of thing, but that excites me because from a male point of view, there are resources out there. There are a few, decent books for sure around the midlife journey, but there's not nearly enough. This is something we all go through as humans, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Can I say one thing real about that for a resource? That it's not, I love to talk about masculine and feminine archetypes because we all have those archetypes inside of us. And one of the things to think about with midlife is there's the classic hero's journey is typically the adolescent journey, and the heroine, all that means is it's an inner journey, the heroine's journey. So all of us love to be on the mountain and I am the hero. And all of us need an inner journey just as strongly. And so you can view it because generally people with midlife struggles, we have a sensitivity. And that sensitivity is, I'm not satisfied with just external success, because if we were, we usually, it doesn't hit you the same way. So that sensitivity is saying it's time to go inside, right? It's time. And there's nothing wrong that we didn't go inside earlier or we did before, and it's a newer version. It's the depth of you versus the peak of you. Yeah. And then the deeper you go here, the more that peak later gets really grounded. So it's like a channel versus just kind of a flimsy tree that kind of falls in the wind, right? Which is what sometimes our external journey looks like. I know that the sun's changing. I can't fix it.
No, it's great. And it's a beautiful way to wrap up. It's like the sun is coming over your crown chakra and showing us brilliance.
But the summit sounds like fun. I think I'm excited to work with you with it.
Yeah, no, it'll definitely be great. So again, I'm sorry I couldn't get that caption up there for people, but my computer's kind of freezing up in different
Yeah.
ways here. Great. So this has been really lovely. I look forward to what we can collaborate on in the
Yeah.
future, and continuing this discussion, and putting resource out there. The hero's journey part 2, or whatever you want to call it, that's very much a Jungian kind of an approach to
Yeah.
midlife. And I love that, because some people may poo-poo that whole hero's journey kind of narrative, but it's important,
Of course.
and
Very
it's
much.
that inner journey, as opposed to who am I becoming in this big beautiful world. It's like,
Yeah.
now who am I becoming in this big beautiful
Yeah.
world?
Yeah,
Right?
no, our psyche is very much a gigantic landscape to explore. So yeah.
All right. Well, we'll let you go and enjoy your sunlight in Florida. And thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it.
Okay, we'll talk soon.